The Pakistani Taliban is refuting an earlier claim of responsibility for a deadly suicide bombing at a court in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. Now, the country's interior minister says 12 people were killed and more than 24 others were reportedly injured. An earlier statement by a breakaway faction of the Pakistani Taliban claimed that it had targeted judges, lawyers and officials working under what they called un-Islamic laws. Shortly after, one of the group's commanders said that no such claim had been made. Well, this is how one person described what he saw and heard when the blast happened.
It was
30 to 35 minutes after we parked our vehicles and entered the gate. There was a loud explosion. It was a big explosion. There was fire all over. Body parts were strewn about. There was chaos. Then police and security personnel arrived. It was a big explosion. It looked like a bomb blast.
All right, let's get more from freelance journalist Mehreen Malik, who joins us from Islamabad. Welcome, Mehreen. Let's start with this claim of responsibility, which was then refuted. What are we to make of this confused picture?
Thank you for having me. Yes, that's correct. The situation around responsibility is contested. We had the central leadership of the TTP issuing a statement of dissociation from the attack, but then a splinter faction, which is the Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, has circulated a claim saying it carried out the suicide attack. And I think what I'd say on that is that this is not unusual in Pakistan's militant landscape, because the TTP is not a single unified organization. It's a lot of factions, a network of factions with internal disputes and shifting loyalties. So a lot of groups do operate semi-autonomously, but they still use the broader ideological label of the TTP. And the Jamaat-ul-Ahrar in particular has a history of both coordinating with and breaking away from core TTP leadership, depending on the moment. So the conflicting claims, I think, do two important things. They highlight the fragmentation inside the TTP movement, but they also, very importantly, complicate attribution for security agencies, because the more splintered these networks are, the harder it becomes to assess command responsibility and then prevent further attacks and establish accountability.
Right. But as far as we can tell, both statements can be true. The TGB, the sort of broad Pakistani Taliban, can say this was not us, while this splinter group says, yeah, we did it.
Right. Like I said, this is not unusual in Pakistan. This happens all the time.
And what are Pakistani authorities saying about this blast?
I think Pakistani officials are clear that such attacks follow the pattern of earlier attacks by the TTP. And of course, Islamabad says that TTP is planning and carrying out these attacks from safe havens in Afghanistan, and that they also have backing from India, which is, of course, another arch rival of Pakistan. Despite the contested claims, I think it makes sense that suspicion is likely to fall on the TTP, because the pattern is quite clear. Most of the recent attacks, including one yesterday, which was an attempted assault on a cadet college in South Waziristan, which is near the Afghan border, they've all followed the same tactics and signature. And this trend, in fact, that we've seen since 2021 by the TTP and its factions, which are that they are increasingly trying to strike symbolic state targets, right? So whether it's courts, whether it's police compounds, whether it's military and paramilitary targets, whether it's security convoys, these are the targets. And the idea is, of course, to undermine confidence in the government's ability to maintain order. I think it's also really important to talk about the location of today's attack, right? I think it has both strategic and symbolic value, because you've got this court in a main area of the capital where you have hundreds of lawyers and defendants and police officers and ordinary citizens coming and going throughout the day. So they're trying to send this message of intimidation. They're trying to raise questions about the state's ability to protect the people, right?
Just on that point, we've seen that attacks like this in major urban areas had become less common. So does Pakistan now have a growing security problem?
I think there is a growing and evolving security challenge, no doubt. Over the last decade, as you said, major cities like Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi have seen a significant reduction in militant violence due to counterterrorism operations and full-on armed military operations. But since the Afghan Taliban returned to power in 2021, we've seen a resurgence of cross-border militancies. Now, most of this violence is concentrated in the northwest. So the former tribal areas in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which border Afghanistan. But what we're seeing now is a spillover into urban areas. So the Islamabad blast today, and then yesterday's attempted attack on a cadet college. I mean, they suggest that the group is definitely trying to show that it still has reach and it can strike targets linked to the state, anywhere in the country. So while urban security is improved, the threat environment is shifting.
And while these
attacks
while these militants are attacking the state, what sort of support do they have from the rest of Pakistani society? Are they seen as freedom fighters?
No, I would strongly say that public support for the TTP inside Pakistan is extremely limited. The overwhelming majority of Pakistanis, whether it's in urban or rural areas, they reject the group's ideology. The TTP is in fact widely seen as responsible for some of the country's worst violence, including the 2014 attack, if you remember, on the school in the school massacre in Peshawar, where more than 130 children were killed. And I think that event in particular shaped national memory and solidified public revulsion. But the political discourse does get complicated, right? There are certain religious and right-leaning groups that criticize the state's counterterrorism policies or call for dialogue rather than military action. But I think that should not be confused with support for the TTP's aims. These groups may share some broad religious vocabulary, but they don't endorse the TTP's armed campaign or its approach to governance.
Thank you so much for guiding us through that so clearly, Mehreen. Mehreen Azara Malik, as a freelance journalist in Islamabad. Thank you.
Thank you.